Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. James, sitting in the stuffy car, gazed out the window with admiration past passing floating landscapes were painfully native. The fields of the forest he had dreamed of, doing time in places not so remote. His desire was to ask the driver to stop, run out of the bus, throw off his shoes and barefoot, walk on the grass right across the field, and then fall to the ground, look at the blue sky and listen to the whispering leaves, and breathe deeply, inhaling with his whole chest this fresh, clean air. The 3 years that the court had sentenced the boy to seemed endless. Very often he dreamed of his yard birch with raindrops on the leaves. And what is most interesting, in none of his dreams, he never once saw the one for whom he found himself in such a sad place. And who was she? One of the fleeting girls he'd been clubbing with, a wastrel. And judging by her provocative outfits and behavior, she knew it herself. As a result, nothing good. Of course, it did not end. When James, at her friend's request, went away from her to the bar to get a new portion of alcohol, she was accosted by drunken guys. James, not thinking long, returned and a fight ensued. The guy badly remembered who pushed whom, who hit whom first. Everything happened too fast. One of the attackers fell and never got up again. As it turned out later, the fall was unfortunate. The young man had hit a concrete step with his paddle. Did James regret what he'd done? Yes, of course he did. The first time he was behind bars, every night before he went to bed, he replayed the events of that terrible evening. Only now he realized that it could have been resolved verbally. It wasn't necessary to use his fists. And then the fate of all the people would have been different, and the murdered man would still be alive. But he understood that now, what's done is done, and there was no going back. That girl that James got into a fight over, of course she wasn't going to wait for him. In fact, no one was counting on it. There was nothing serious between them. Did he think she was to blame for what happened? No, he didn't. He had only himself to blame. James sighed heavily. On the other hand, those 3 years were behind him, and now he had a wonderful life ahead of him. Now, of course, he wouldn't get into any more trouble. He's going home. It was very stuffy on the bus. He looked around and noticed that not a single window was open. Then he turned to the girl sitting next to him. "Excuse me, would you mind if I opened the window?" "Yes, of course. Open it a little," the neighbor replied. James immediately reached up and pulled the window sashes down, then looked at the girl again carefully. Pretty flashed through his mind. Only for some reason very sad, almost crying. You can see it in her eyes. "Did something happen to you?" James asked cautiously. "No, nothing's wrong." "Why would you say that?" "Well, because your eyes are wet and it shows." "No, really, I'm fine," she insisted, though her shaky voice gave her away. James wanted to distract her from her sad thoughts, and without expecting it, he blurted out, "I'm going home. 3 years in prison. And today I'm out. You have no idea how happy I am. If I could, I'd hug the whole world." She, interested, looked at the guy, but at the same time cautiously in pity all the money, as if distancing herself from him. "Don't worry," laughed James. "I'm not a maniac. You have nothing to fear. It's just that 3 years ago, I got into a drunken brawl, and a man died because of me. But believe me, I didn't mean it. You see, I've told you everything to the letter. Now it's your turn. What happened to you anyway? My name's James, by the way. What's yours?" "I'm Kathy, but I have a husband, and I'm not dating anyone or anything." "Well, I'm not claiming anything. I just wanted to chat, to pass the time on the road." The guy smiled. "You have no idea how nice it is to talk to a regular person. Besides, if I'm not mistaken, we're countrymen." "That's right. The terminus is in my hometown. You're from there too." "Yes," Kathy nodded. She looked more closely at her companion. He was a good-looking guy with a good-natured face, and for a moment she thought she'd seen him somewhere before. Could be. It was a small town, And given that they were the same age, they'd probably crossed paths somewhere. And James didn't look like a criminal to me. If he hadn't admitted it himself, Kathy wouldn't have thought of it. Maybe he really just wanted to socialize after such a difficult time in his life. "All right," she replied. "Can we talk about something? How old are you?" "Just turned 25. But where I've been?" "They don't celebrate birthdays." That's what Kathy thought. And I was right. We're the same age as them. "So you'd be 22. It was very scary," James exclaimed. I was terrified. But to be honest, at the time, prison time didn't scare me. It was the thought of taking a man's life that terrified me. It took me a very long time to get used to and come to terms with that thought. James was surprised at how easy it was for him to communicate with his new acquaintance. He felt that she understood him like no one else. There was something about the painting that made James feel at ease. They drove the rest of the way over the friendly conversation, and James didn't notice the bus pulling into his hometown and stopping at the bus station. He looked around in confusion. Kathy waved goodbye and disappeared around the corner. It had to be admitted that not much had changed in the time he'd been gone. Even the cab stand was in the same place. Not thinking long, James went in the direction of the cars. It would be a 10-minute drive to his home, and he would finally get to see his father and hug him. In the 3 years he'd been in prison, neither his father nor his brother had written him a single letter. Hate letters. But he didn't resent them. He understood everything. His father was sick before he went to prison. He'd forgotten a lot of things, confused his sons, and Nick wasn't initially thrilled that his brother was a felon. James, I really wanted to believe that his father's health hadn't deteriorated in those 3 years. His dad had been a successful businessman for a long time, had a huge auto parts store in the center of town, and several volumes of business, because there wasn't much competition. Even before James' men's imprisonment, he tried to pass the management to his sons. James had done better than his older brother, and he really hoped that during his absence, Nick hadn't let the store go to waste. When the cab parked in a private lot near the family home, James was speechless at what he saw. A second floor had been added to the house. It wasn't even a house anymore. It was a palace. "Well done, Dad." The boy smiled. "So things were still going so well. And how did you organize the territory?" "New gates have been installed. Now you can see at once that wealthy people live here." They had long ago told his father that they should have done so, but the man did not want to stand out in front of the neighbors. Nick managed to talk him into it. Pulled the gate. James realized it was locked. He pressed the bell a couple times and waited. But no one was in a hurry to open it for him. Suddenly, a small box next to the bell rang, and from it came his brother's disgruntled voice. "Who?" "Nick. Hello from the Sparrow. Your brother's back." A few minutes later, James looked at his brother and couldn't say a word out of shock. He hadn't even noticed the travel bag sinking from his shoulder and falling to the concrete. Died when? Why didn't he tell me anything? I had a right to know. Would it have made a difference? Nick snapped at me. Maybe they let you out of jail for the funeral. James squatted down and wrapped his arms around his knees. Dad, how come? Why didn't you wait for me? Why did he die? James asked his brother. A heart attack. Apparently, his heart couldn't handle the embarrassment of being the son of a criminal. Don't tell me, James muttered. Where's he buried? I'm going to go see him now. Yeah, right now. The boy got up and grabbed his bag from the floor. I'll just throw my things in my room. Where are you going to throw them? His brother asked indignantly. This isn't your room anymore. The house has been remodeled, in case you hadn't noticed, and your father's death isn't all sad news for you. Before he died, as if he had a premonition, he made a will. Everything belongs to me now, the stores and the house. So I'm sorry, little brother. Nick spread his hands. Now do you see why your room isn't here? The house is mine. James' heart was tearing apart, not from being disinherited, but from the thought that he'd disappointed his father so much, just doing it that way. Right after he was arrested, His dad came to see him. The man was completely sane. Apparently, he'd had one of his moments of enlightenment. The last time they met, Dad said, "Son, there's a law for doing things, and I'm not gonna drag you out of here. I realize you didn't do it on purpose, but you killed a man and you must be punished for it, so you can feel the weight of what you've done. But remember, no matter what, you're my son, and I love you very much. If they let me, I will definitely come to visit you in prison. I will be very much looking forward to your release." These words did not come as a surprise to James. He had always known that his father was a fair and honest man, but despite the fact that James was the favorite in the family, and this was noticed by many people, he would never help him in such a situation. The character wasn't right, and James did not understand why his father did not come to see him. The guy decided that his health did not allow, and the reason turned out to be something else entirely. "Fine, let the house be yours, if that makes you feel better," James muttered. "But can you take me in for a while? I'll need a corner until I can get a place to live." Nick pointed to an inconspicuous door under the stairs. "That's where I put all your stuff. But I'm telling you, you've got a month to do everything. If you don't find a place to live and get a job during that time, you'll go to live on the street, and I'm not going to babysit you." That's quite a month. I didn't expect that kind of generosity. James grinned. "A month is a month. Tell me where Dad's buried." Suddenly, the front door opened and Kathy, the one James had met a few hours earlier, walked in. "No show, no sharing at last," Nick shouted. "We agreed you'd go one day. But I called and warned you that I couldn't get the documents so quickly," she mumbled, not taking her eyes off James. "Yeah, is that my problem or what? Who do you think should watch the kid all this time? You'd think I'd have nothing to do. Good mom left her kid for almost 24 hours and doesn't give a shit." Nick noticed that his wife was keeping an eye on his brother. "Yes, by the way, this is my brother released from a place not so remote. But don't worry, he won't be here long." How he got free, Kathy wondered. "But you told me." "Nobody cares what I told you. He's here, period." Nick interrupted her. Kathy looked at James in such a belittling way that he immediately understood. No need to mention that they knew each other. Nick might see it that way. Isis smiled tiredly at James. "Honestly, I don't know what to call you, but it's definitely nice to meet you. Well, I gotta go. I wanted to visit my father." James went to the room Nick had given him. It had been a closet, but now all of James's things had been thrown in there. There was only a couch and a small platinum cabinet where his things hung. It should be noted that before his imprisonment, James had spared no money for clothes, and now he was glad that his brother had kept it all and not given it away to the homeless out of spite. James set his bag by the door and sank down on the sofa by the table. It was hard to accept the loss of his father because he had been in such a hurry to see him. "Oh, Nick, why didn't you tell me?" He could hear the swearing between his brother and his wife. Though it was hardly swearing either, it was mostly Nick. Kathy was trying to justify herself. "I told you to go watch the baby. Mother talk. I gotta go run some errands." And a couple seconds later, James heard the front door slam loudly. Kathy climbed the stairs to the second floor, to the baby. "So Nick has a son, and I have a nephew," pondered James. "It's only been 3 years. How much had changed?" James changed his clothes and was about to leave, but realized that Nick hadn't told him where his father was buried. Then the guy left the room and went up to the second floor. Not knowing which door to enter, he shouted loudly, "Kathy, where are you?" "I am here invited," Anna replied. James entered the room and immediately realized that it was the nursery. The surroundings spoke for themselves. When he saw the baby Kathy was holding, he gasped in surprise. He looked so much like his late grandfather. "Hello, tribe." James smiled, keeping a surprised look on the boy's face. "And what is your name?" "Kevin," answered Kathy, "and we recently turned a year old." "James, I wanted to thank you and ask you to keep our acquaintance a secret. Nick would be very unhappy if he found out." Yeah, I get it. I get it, the guy said. Of course I won't. Can I support my nephew? Has anyone ever told you he looks like our dad? A lot. Yes, Nick said. At the time of your dad's death, we were just dating, so I hadn't really seen him. Nick, I didn't tell you much, and to be honest, I didn't see you that way. He made it sound like you were a bloodthirsty killer with a lot of time to sit around. So when we talked on the bus, it didn't occur to me that you were my husband's brother. Although, looking at your face, I knew you definitely reminded me of someone. I'm sorry, but I always say what I think. Kathy was making excuses again. But James didn't hear her. He was preoccupied with his nephew. Then the girl explained where their father was buried. And coming to the cemetery, James sat at the grave for a very long time, almost 3 hours whispering the same phrase. I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry. He got home late. Nick would rather have gone to bed already. So when his disgruntled brother opened the gate for him, he immediately shoved a set of keys into his hands. It won't take long, he muttered. And don't take too long to find a job. In the morning, James decided that he would go straight to look for a job, but he didn't even notice how his feet brought him to a familiar store. This is where he spent his childhood and youth, helping his father. Of course, today the store looked very different from what it had been in his father's time. It used to be a small building, but now it was a huge one-story building with glass windows, a huge sign with a ticker, and an inflatable figure next to it called out "Shopper" appealingly. The store's staff had changed completely. James didn't recognize anyone, but the guy didn't give up hope of finding one person. And here a smile lit up his face. "Stephen, James, you're back," sincerely rejoiced an elderly man. He came up to the boy and hugged him tightly. "Oh, James, I couldn't wait for you, Father." Stephen was an old friend of James's father. As soon as the store started to grow and the need for extra hands arose, Stephen was the first to be hired. "Let's go," the man nodded. "Toward the back. We'll have a chat. Tell me about your misadventures." "Yes, tell me about your misadventures." "You don't have much to tell," James replied. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the back room, "Stephen, is it true that my father died for me? That I am already weak of heart? I couldn't take the shame. Nick told me so." "What are you talking about? It never occurred to me to shame you. Everybody can make mistakes. We talked to him about your situation many times, and he kept saying, if he did something wrong, let him serve his sentence. When he's released, I'll take him straight to work. And when he found out about the will, I was very surprised. I don't know why he signed it over to Nick, though he was a little slow on the uptake then. James. The disease progressed. After a while, Stephen glanced at his watch. "Hurry up," James clarified. "Nick is a very strict boss," he replied. "We now have a system of fines, including for absenteeism. You'd better come to me in the evening. We'll have a quiet cup of tea and chat." "Okay," smiled the guy. "I also basically have to go. I still need to look for a job." "What's there to look for?" "Your brother needs a driver. Who knows the specifics of the job better than you? We still have the same suppliers, and you know them well. I think this is the right place for you." Suddenly, the door to the back room opened, and Nick walked in with a wide, heavy stride. "Stephen, how long are you going to be out of work? What do you want here?" Nick looked at his brother unhappily. "Yeah, I found out you're looking for a driver. Come to get a job. You'll take it." "Of course not. I already have a suitable candidate." "Nick, don't anger God by not turning your brother down. You couldn't find a better man for the job." Standing up for James Stephen, Nick frowned even more and through his teeth muttered, "All right, I'll take it. But I'm warning you, James. Don't poke your nose into the store management. You're just the driver now. Don't forget that." "Not the factories. I won't forget," grinned my brother. "I can get to work right now. Just show me my transportation. And where do I get the accompanying documents?" James worked diligently, as promised, and tried not to get involved in the store. However, when he realized how his brother was doing business, He came to the conclusion that the store was heading for big losses. The first thing James noticed was the overpricing. By doing so, Nick was turning away many regular customers. And here you do not have to be very smart to realize that the store does not bring in the same percentage of profit. But those weren't the only mistakes, and all of this James could bring to his brother's attention. He was well aware that no one would listen to him and would only freak out. Nick was already walking into eternity with a disgruntled face. Returning in the evenings from work, James cooked his own dinner because he was immediately labeled the position here as not catering, and no one has neither time nor desire to cook for you. So you're on your own. Sometimes in the room, James found a container with food. This Kalina secretly left it from her husband. But in general, the atmosphere in this family was certainly unhealthy. The very first minutes of being here, James realized that Nick treated Kathy like property. He was a real tyrant husband. His brother's wife was never seen or heard from. She moved around the house like a shadow. The son mostly didn't cry in his father's presence either. But if he did, Nick screamed like a madman. How many times have I told you to watch the baby better? How much of a neglectful mother are you? It never ceases to amaze me. In my own house, no peace. From time to time, Nick didn't sleep at home. On such days, he would call to warn me about a business trip that he needed to get out of town right away. Kathy and James loved such evenings because they could talk until late at night. They were very easy together. They chatted about everything but one thing. The woman didn't like the subject, but James still insisted. I really want to understand the reasons why you let yourself be treated this way. You're a smart, beautiful woman, and you deserve better. Can't you just put him in his place once? To make him realize he can't do that. Yeah, tell him you're gonna file for divorce eventually. You just don't understand. Kathy shook her head. I should probably go to bed. It's late. It was like this all the time. Eventually, she'd take her son and go back to her place. And one time, James had said something that made him want to punch himself in the mouth. It's a strange business trip for Nick, isn't it? I wonder where he goes. Yeah, nowhere, Kathy exclaimed. With his mistress, he doesn't even leave the city limits. And you are so calmly informing me about it. Stunned James. How long have you known about his mistress? Of course I knew about his mistress first, and I knew about that too. I'm not an idiot, but now I don't understand you. Why do you live with him? Explain. He's my brother, of course, but you're not a stranger. I can't bear to see you humiliated. Get up off your knees and show some character. Walk away from him and believe me, he'll come crawling back for you. When he sees you're not a spineless creature, he'll change his attitude. Has it never occurred to you yourself? It never crossed my mind. And what's more, I broke up with him. But you know what the point is. I raised my voice at the orphanage. Kathy, but then I stopped talking. That's it. Let's drop the subject. I'm going to bed. She left, and James was left sitting in the kitchen in bewilderment. What does this have to do with the orphanage? The guy thought, orphanages don't leave their husbands. Or is it so important to her material well-being that she is ready to put up with a boorish attitude and change? In all the time she's been living here, James has never once heard Nick speak calmly to Kathy. He was always yelling at her. It was late evening and James was already asleep, tired from the day's long haul of goods. But as sound asleep, he was awakened by some strange sound, like a fall. It was coming from the second floor. James sat up jerkily on the couch and listened. Yes, it was. Nick is yelling at Kathy again. Only this time it wasn't quite the usual. His wife's voice could be heard in addition to his brother's. Kathy's repeating it all over and over again. You can't make out the words. I think, judging by the intonation. Don't please. And then there was another thud like the one that had awakened James a moment ago. An alarming hunch struck the boy. He jumped to his feet and raced to the second floor. James opened the bedroom door without knocking, and his fears were confirmed. Nick swung around to hit Kathy again, and the girl, not even trying to get up off the floor, repeated not to. "Nick, please." James rushed into the room and grabbed Nick's arm. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. Nick yanked his arm out and turned around to face James. "I am crazy. Where are you sticking your nose in? We'll figure it out. This is our family business, and you've been taken in. Be happy." Nick that moment was unlike himself. His eyes narrowed, and the glimmers were of anger. "Get out of our bedroom." "No," James shook his head negatively. "You have to promise not to lay a finger on your wife. What's her fault that she deserves to be treated this way?" "Well, if you're so interested, I picked up this pathetic orphanage from the street. She didn't even have a place to live. She managed to blow the apartment the state gave her. She went to a friend's house. I took her in. I dressed her. Abdul, she should kiss my feet. And she what? She can't take care of a child. The house is messy and dirty, but she's got plenty of time for tail wagging." "Nick, what tail? Are you crazy? Your wife never leaves the house. She sits like a mouse." "Yeah, but when she comes out with me, I see her staring at men. Just give her a free pass. I see you're obsessed with your thoughts, and it's useless to change your mind. But in any case, you have no right to hit her. It doesn't suit you. Divorce. And I'm telling you again, mind your own business. Go to your place. And don't worry, don't touch her. Go to bed." What a bunch of protectors. Nick lay down on the bed, making it clear that he didn't want to talk anymore. James glanced at Kathy, who was rising from her knees, trying to cover herself. She was wearing a nightgown. The girl couldn't even look up at James. The boy realized she was uncomfortable and hurried out of the room. In the morning, James waited until Nikolaev slammed the door behind him, the front door, and the car goes out the gate, before leaving his room. Not finding Kathy on the first floor, he went to the second. The guy decided to talk to the girl by all means. Knocked. He entered without waiting for permission. She only had time to throw on her robe. Without asking anything, he walked quickly over to her and opened her robe with a jerk. "Are you crazy?" shouted Kathy, trying to cover herself. "Believe me, I'm not for the purpose of admiration, but my hunch was confirmed," James said grimly. Kathy's body was covered in bruises. Some were fresh. Some were already nudging. "So he beats you so you can't see anything. Doesn't touch your face. Right? If I just didn't understand why you were around him before, now I'm stumped. Kathy, do you like this life, or is there some other reason? Where am I going? You've heard I'm an orphan. So, you talk like you're a leper." Surprised James. "No, it's not just that." Kathy couldn't hold back her hysterics any longer and turned to screaming. "You think I haven't tried leaving your brother? I rented an apartment and enjoyed my freedom and a quiet life. But he found me quickly, took my son, and told me I could go away. But he wouldn't give me my son." Kathy was sobbing, spilling out the bitterness and resentment that had long accumulated in her. "I didn't see my son for a week. Every day I wandered around the house like a beaten dog, begging to be let in. And he reveled in the situation. When he finally let me in, he made it clear that if I wanted to divorce him, he would not prevent it. But his son would stay with him. He has a place to live, money, and most importantly, he has connections in the city administration. He opens some offices and doors with his foot. Whose side do you think so-called justice will be on? The situation is definitely not in my favor. An orphan with nothing, not even a job." James was silent when he suggested Kathy dump his brother. He didn't think much of his nephews. He thought he'd definitely stay with his mother. And here we are. Nick had certainly changed. He hadn't been so cruel before, though he was 5 years older than James, but they'd grown up together for years, and the younger man had never noticed such tendencies in his brother. But then James remembered his father's words. He told him that Nick should never be given power over people. He hadn't explained why he'd said that, but he must have noticed his eldest son's tendency to violence. That there was nothing to say interrupted his musings. "Kathy, because I'm right. I have no way out. I guess it's fate. All right, James, I've got to go feed my son." James never said anything. He went to work, didn't even eat breakfast. All day long, he couldn't get this situation out of his head. It can't go on like this. He had to find a way out of this. The guy still had a week to live in his brother's house. Then he would pay him the first paycheck and hope that James would immediately rent a place and move out. That was basically what James had planned to do. But now he will not live in rented accommodation and will offer his Kathy himself to stay somewhere. At least at Stephen's, the old man won't refuse. And then how to leave his nephew with his mother. You could, of course, tell the court how Nick beats and terrorizes his wife. But will they listen to his words? The words of an ex-con need convincing evidence. The first place to start is to record Kathy's beatings. That document would carry weight in the divorce. And Nick couldn't sleep. Half the night, he rolled over from side to side with Jenna sleeping sweetly beside him. Nick had been visiting her for a long time. He liked spending nights with her, but not much more. She was, so to speak, for the soul. At the beginning of their relationship, he made it clear to his mistress that he wouldn't leave his wife under any circumstances. Then the girl agreed, and now she was blowing her lips on his knee. That's all right. If she continues to be insolent, Nick will be able to put her in her place. In this, he has no equal. Today, Nick, as usual, called his wife and reported about the business trip. But now something was bothering him. And he understood perfectly well that it was his brother living in his house that was bothering him. They were getting too close to his wife. Nick didn't like it. Kathy. He was jealous of every pillar, but she never gave him cause for jealousy. Well, God forbid any man, but God forbid any man to fix his gaze on her. And Nikolai's blood boiled instantly, and at home he took his anger out on her. Tired of insomnia, he sat up in bed and lit the earpiece. "What are you doing up?" Jenna mumbled through her sleep. "I can't sleep. I'm going home. I'm restless." Like home. Jenna opened her eyes immediately. "You told your wife you were out of town, but it's okay. I'm back. I'll surprise you." "Oh, it's up to you," grumbled the disgruntled woman and rolled over to the other side. While Nick drove the car home, he had worked himself up into such a state that he was simply furious. Scenes of his wife and brother together kept popping up in his head. What could they possibly be doing? "You're staying at my house. Shouldn't have traveled yet." The house, he was greeted with peace and quiet. Nick didn't even turn on the lights. He flew to the second floor and opened the bedroom door. Right. How was he right? The bed was empty, not even sprawled out. He immediately went downstairs and didn't knock. Swung open the door to James' room. Fire at hand, finding a light switch, he turned on the light. But James sat alone. Kathy wasn't here. Nick's heart eased a little. That it was morning. I'd overslept. James woke up, squinting against the bright light. "Kathy, no. In the bedroom. Where is she?" "So why are you asking me where your wife is?" "First of all, stop yelling. Maybe she's in the bathroom. The bed hasn't been assigned. She's not in the house. What did she say last night? Maybe she was going somewhere. I don't know. I didn't see her last night." Nick came home late, went straight to bed, and the house was quiet. And I thought she and her son had gone to bed. Kevin's right. It's not like I wasn't looking in the nursery. Nick ran up the stairs again. The sun had gone out of James's face, and he followed his brother. But it soon became clear that neither Kathy nor his son were in the house, and in addition their belongings were missing. Had she run away? Nick wondered. I don't get it. Life doesn't teach that fool anything. But she's not in prison to escape. James grinned. James grinned, hearing his brother's reasoning. She's just gone. And I think she did the right thing, by the way. I don't know how she lived with you as long as she did. And don't you dare threaten to take Kevin away from her. A child should live with its mother. If you try to take her son away from her, I'll testify against you and tell her you beat her systematically. The fact that I beat her will have to be proved. Nick grinned. And you're meddling again. You don't know anything at all, but you're just standing there being smart. Nobody's going to leave the baby to her. just like no one's gonna listen to you. She's the one who's all decent and modest now. But you have no idea what a fun life she led before we met. I told you she even blew off the house they gave her after the orphanage. Why am I surprising you? You don't have to answer that. I can see that. Kathy probably didn't tell you about it. Of course, she wouldn't have benefited from it. Now the question is, whose side will this court be on when it comes to her son? And that fool won't repent. I'll develop faster with her myself. I'll take the kid and let her go. James looked at his brother as if he was seeing him for the first time. Nick, you're seriously saying that now? Didn't you do some weird stuff when you were young? We're all sinful. I, for example, remember very well how your father took you away with the police and clearly you weren't vacationing there. And Kathy is a normal person and a caring mother now. She doesn't drink and she doesn't go out. And she cares about her son. Leave him alone. No, Nick was stubborn. We got the whole town on edge. But he's still got that bitch. I'm gonna make her cry. The next day, Nick searched the city in the morning, using everyone he could find. But he couldn't find his wife. She had no friends, and only after 2 days of active search it turned out that she had bought a train ticket to Vladivostok. Nick checked and found out that the girl never reached the final station and got off the train somewhere earlier, but where is unknown. Only now the man realized that this time it was much more serious. Kathy skillfully covered her tracks so that he could never find her. The man returned home angry as hell. And when he saw a satisfied James in the kitchen, cooking dinner, he was even more furious. I don't understand why you're still working here. You got your paycheck for the month. Well, let's get out of here. It's time to get an apartment. Yes, I will, grinned the guy. I'll do it tomorrow. I was just worried about the picture. But now I'm sure you won't be able to find it, so I can move out with a clear conscience. Get out of here, hissed a furious Nick. Get out of here. Right now, I told you. It didn't take James long to find a place to live. Stephen found out that it was time for James to move out from his brother, immediately invited him to stay with him. The house is a big man long ago divorced. The daughter has grown up and lives in another city. And Stephen told James that he would be only for joy if the guy will stay with him. And no money, of course, he will not take from him. James didn't have to be persuaded. Stephen was like family to him. He had grown up in front of the man's eyes. He was already sorting through his things in the spacious room with the large windows. As James pulled the neatly folded t-shirts out of the bag, at the bottom, his fingers came across a quadruple folded piece of paper. What is this? He unfolded the sheet, he thought. It turned out to be a farewell letter from Kathy. James had no time to say goodbye, so had decided to do it this way. In the letter, it was clear from the handwriting that the girl was in a hurry. I've been planning my escape for a long time and preparing for it thoroughly. Remember when we met on the bus? That trip wasn't just for fun. It was one of the elements of preparation. You always asked me why I put up with all this and didn't leave Nick. You just don't know everything about me. After the orphanage, I fell in with some bad company. I drank, smoked. I had a wild life. Yeah, all of that. At the time, I didn't understand what Nick saw in me, why he chose me. Now I realize I was easy to manipulate, given my past, and Nick regularly needs to take out his anger on someone. Well, it's a character trait. I regret my past, of course, but unfortunately, those mistakes can't be undone. Now the whole point of my life is my son, and I can't lose him. Thank you for everything. Such good people in my life, met very few. I wish we'd met sooner. But you know, there's something else you should know. Back at the house, I couldn't open up to you about my brother because I get caught again. And now I have nothing to fear. Your father signed the will in an inebriated state. He didn't know what he was doing. I know for a fact he didn't plan on leaving you without an inheritance, but his illness progressed more and more each day. And more often than not, he was insane. That's when your brother took advantage. One day he bribed a notary. He was the one who came to our house. So when your father signed the will, he didn't realize what he was doing. But unfortunately, that's not all. When Nick and I were dating, I witnessed a scandal between your father and Nick. As far as I could understand, Dad somehow remembered that he had signed something and demanded to see the papers, but Nick refused. Then Dad said something I'll never forget. "You're never getting my store. I'm leaving all this to James. He's honest and much better than you." Nick then jumped out of the house, followed by Dad showing up. He was holding onto the wall with one hand and his heart with the other. That's when he started having a heart attack. I told Nick that I needed an ambulance, that Dad wasn't feeling well, but he just yelled at me, saying that the old man was just playing pity games, that your father was gone for the night. I'm so sorry, and I should have let you know. It's just that I heard Nick telling you that you were responsible for your dad's death. Don't believe that's a lie. I know for a fact that your father loved you very much and waited for you. Goodbye, James. Maybe we'll see each other again someday. James could not believe his eyes. He read the letter several times, but his brain refused to believe it. It couldn't be true. Nick couldn't have been so cruel to his father. Had he really left him alone? Didn't even call an ambulance. On the other hand, there was no reason not to believe Kathy either. As much as I didn't want to accept this information, but in his heart, James realized that everything written in the letter was the purest truth. Stephen suddenly interrupted the boys' musings by looking into the room. "James, how did you arrange the bedding in the closet on the top shelf? James, can you hear me?" The lad turned to the man and held out a piece of paper. "Read it, please," he asked. Mukina quickly ran his eyes over what was written, then sighed heavily, folded the letter, and looked at James. "What can I tell you? I'm not surprised at all. I told you even then that I didn't quite understand your father's actions. I mean, his actions didn't match his words. It just couldn't be. But I had no proof. It was just a hunch. Now you know the notary. Now we can deal with it. Start. Maybe you'll get something. Just don't drag it out. What's there to deal with?" Sam is a classmate of Nick's, if memory serves me correctly. "Do you really think he's gonna tell me the whole truth?" "Yeah, it's my fault. I'll make it up to you." "No, of course not. It's obvious he's in on it and knew it all from the start. But that's not what I'm worried about. I don't need it. It's an inheritance, Stephen. But you could have saved Dad, not left him alone. Then Dad could be alive now. I'll go to Kelly at once and sort it all out." The boy headed resolutely for the door, but Stephen immediately grabbed him by the shoulder. "Don't, James. You'll only make a mess of things. In this state of mind, everything must be done with a fresh head. It's a shame about your father, I agree, but you can't bring him back. But if you go to your brother, you could end up in a fight. And then what? That's right. You'll go back to where you just came from. I'm sick of freedom. He's gonna file a report on you right away. You bet he will. So what do you suggest?" James looked at the men. "Well, first of all, calm down, get a grip. Secondly, take a sick day at work, so you don't cross paths with your brother. Better yet, take care of your inheritance issues. Challenge the will. It'll hurt Nick more, believe me." Tomorrow morning, straight to Sam's, James decided to take his father's advice. And in the morning, just before it opened, he was at the door of the notary's office. He recognized Sam immediately. James wasn't wrong. It was definitely Nick's classmate. And it was obvious from the notary's face that he recognized James too. But as he came closer, Sam smiled fake smile. "Hi, James. How many years? How many winters? How long have you been out? What brings you here? No foreplay. Stop, James the notary. I'm thinking about my release. You know everything in detail. You better tell me this. How come my incapacitated father was able to make and sign a will for Nick? And what makes you think that your father was incapacitated at the time of signing?" Sam was surprised. "I personally dealt with the case. I came to your house because your father was ill and could hardly move. The will was also drawn up at home. Well, you know, your father was fully competent at the time, fully aware of his actions. I can attest to that in court. I even have independent witnesses, so everything here is done according to the law. Don't even doubt it. Sam, smirking achidically, stared directly into the eyes of James. Suddenly the latter, unable to stand it, grabbed the notary by the breasts, and with all his might was coming against the brick wall of the building. But the notary only continued to smile. And I see you've missed the zone. I can arrange a repeat trip to places not so remote, but for a longer period. Returning home in the evening, Stephen found James gloomier than a cloud. I take it the result of the meeting with the notary is nil. Is he really Nick's classmate? Yes, nodded James. He himself claims that everything was done according to the law. I went to a lawyer afterwards. I thought, what would he advise me in such a situation? What's the right thing to do? And he told me that there's nothing to be done. You just have to accept it. There's no medical examination, so there's no way to prove he's incompetent, and the rest is just words. And I can't prove that Nick bribed the notary and their witness. Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch, Stephen. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to upset you even more. Your brother called me into his office today and yelled so much he drooled. He already knows you're living with me, but he said he doesn't care. But the fact that you went to the notary and threatened me, I didn't threaten him. James was outraged. It was just a little temper tantrum. James, it's not in your interest to go on a shooting spree. You understand, everything must be done according to the law. No amateurishness. This Sam has already reported everything to Nick. Your brother's furious. You have no idea how he yelled one word. You're fired as of today. Here's your papers. Nick threw them in my face. Told me not to show my face to him again. And my brother, by the way, he said he doesn't have one anymore. Well, that's to be expected. I don't want to see Nick myself. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. I was only staying with him for the picture. I was afraid to leave them alone together. And basically, I can say I don't have a brother anymore. You're talking about the law. According to the lawyer, I can't do anything. What are we left with? A notarized document against the word of a felon. That's ridiculous. Yeah, scratching the back of Stephen's head really isn't fun. What are you gonna do next? What I can do, I'm gonna look for another job. I can't be a bum sitting on your ass, but that's where I can help you. A man exclaimed. I recently met a friend of my daughter. I do not remember exactly what her job title is, but I know that she delivers medicines to pharmacies. Well, she needs a driver because she can't drive. And the one from the other day quit. The only inconvenience is having to drive all over town. Well, I don't think that's gonna be a problem for you. So you'll do it? Yeah, sure, I'm in, James exclaimed. And in a couple of days he met Lucy and started his new job. Lucy turned out to be a cheerful girl with a short haircut and all the time tried to talk, silent on the first James. And the guy was not up to fun. He did not let go of heavy thoughts about his father and his mean brother. But in the end, James and Lucy became friends. To be honest, Nick was having a hard time with it, too. As soon as his girlfriend found out his wife had left him, she was at his door 2 hours later with her things, arriving without a call, just putting the man before the fact. I wonder what you expected. You're free now, which means there's nothing stopping us from being together. Your wife left you. I mean, sleeping with me means you're right there, but living together, we'll think about it. No, my dear, it won't work that way. Jenna, my wife is not gone forever. It's temporary. As soon as I carry her, I'll bring her back here. To what end? Exclaimed an indignant Jenna. She's made it clear to you that she doesn't want to live with you. Why would you force someone to do that? Especially since you're not alone. You have me, and I love you very much. Nick gritted his teeth like a toothache. He knew perfectly well what exactly Jenna loves: money. That's the only love she had. Jenna, we have a son in common, And in case you haven't forgotten, he continued to insist on his point. And my son has to live only with me. I will never give up on him. Okay. Immediately agreed the girl's son take the son and file for divorce. What's the problem? Aren't you going to raise him? What's wrong with that? Yes, I don't want my son to be brought up by a stranger's woman, no matter how she is, still a mother. So in your eyes, I'm a strange woman. That depends. Not to me, but to Kevin, yes. Okay, there's no point in arguing. That's what we'll do. You're here for now. Since the woman's here, the house still needs cleaning, eating, cooking. I don't mind. But as soon as I get my family back, you can't be here. And without any scandals or hysterics. Is that okay with you? No, it's not okay with Jenna's pouty lips. But I'll stay. Maybe I'll get lucky and you'll never find them. She's done a lot of planning for her escape. You can tell. Nick decided not to tell Jenna that he was currently in the process of divorcing Kathy. His plan had long been to divorce his wife officially and determine his son's place of residence with him. He had even paid all the right people so that there would be no problems. Soon, very soon, all the documents were to be in his hands, and that's when he'll find the picture from under the ground. He would get this scum and take away his son not just for nothing, but on the basis of the relevant documents. He knew perfectly well that his wife couldn't do without her son. And under such circumstances, she herself will come to him on her knees and will endure all the humiliation. He wouldn't let her come back right away. He planned to torture her for a long time to make her realize what a lowlife she is. But then, of course, he would bring her back, because Kathy was the one he saw as his wife, and certainly not Jenna. The latter has a family, and they could stand up for her daughter. And Jenna had a temper of her own. Nick was a little afraid of her himself. He knew if he laid a finger on her, she'd pull your hair out. Jenna was definitely not replaceable to the new Kathy. So he's looking for a wife, no matter what, especially since he already knows the train number and the carriage she left in. So he planned to talk to the conductor personally. Maybe he could find out at which station she got off. The man glanced nervously at his watch. Soon this very train will be passing through town, and the very conductor is on shift. So he had to get to the station right away. Good job, he muttered. Get dressed. But don't forget, it's only temporary. After these words, Nick flew out of the house and jumped into the car and drove in the direction of the station. There was still a lot of time before the train arrived, but his patience had run out. Like a hunter, he followed the trail of the beast. He knew he could never live in peace. He had not found his wife. The guide looked at the man glumly and muttered, "Well, actually, I've already answered all the questions. I remember her. She was still with child. But what station did she get off at? I can't tell you. I didn't see her. Well, what if you try?" And Nick carefully put the 5,000th bill into his jacket pocket. The conductor carefully watched his movements and then said, "But you'd say it's important. Let me think about it. I'm afraid of being wrong, of course. But there are two possibilities. Either in Nellie she's gone off, or she's a bogra. No, wait. Kenya. It's a small town. Why didn't I see her get off? I opened the car door and went into the next car for a few minutes, for God's sake. And when the train started 2 hours later, I noticed the passenger was missing. And in the meantime, there were no other stops." Nice grin, Nick. "Thank you. You have no idea how much you've helped me." A few days later, James came home from work in the morning because he'd been traveling long distance and had been on the road all night, and found Stephen in a bad mood. He was glum and silent. Had something happened? James asked. "Yes. I don't even know how to tell you this, James." The man was silent for a moment. He sighed heavily, and Nick continued. "Your brother's been out of town for a couple days, and he came back last night with Kevin. And Kathy." James was worried. "She's here too." "That's the thing, she didn't." He came into the store last night, glowing with pride. He was telling everyone that he got his son back, He shouldn't have to live with a negligent mother. The boy needs a man's education. James' fatigue was gone. What to do? He pondered aloud. Kalinka would never give his son to him herself. We must go to Kelly. What do you think, Stephen? Is he still at home or already at work? But what work? Who's he going to leave his child with? Probably at home. But I'm going to my brother's. Take your time, James. It's none of your business. Koken's son and his wife. You're powerless in this situation. You can't help, but you'll get into trouble. The older man tried to stop him, but the guy only waved his hand at his words. He drove up to the house just as Nick was driving the cars out of the garage. What about Kathy? Where is she? Shouted James on the run, ignoring his older brother, who tried his best to block his way into the house. But James managed to push him away and flew inside, running into the kitchen. He saw a young stranger with very bright, even a little vulgar makeup, trying to feed porridge to Kevin. But the boy was crying, drinking food, and calling for his mom. Who are you? She stared at the unknown guest. That's my brother. Nick's disgruntled voice was heard behind her back. Don't worry, he's leaving now. Answer me, where's Kathy? James turned to his brother. How the hell should I know? Yesterday she was in a small town called Kenneth. Where is she today? God only knows. And I don't really care about her, you know. I wanted a son. And as you can see, I got him back. What right did you have to take a child from its mother? Legally, just so you know, while that lunatic was hiding from me, I divorced her, and the court determined the son's place of residence with his father. And I'm the father, so that makes Kathy a criminal. She kidnapped my child from me. How could you do such a thing? James couldn't believe his own ears. I'm amazed at how despicable you are. Where did you get all this from? Kathy is a wonderful mother and doesn't deserve to be treated like this. That's from your point of view. But the court agrees with me that Kathy is a disgusting mother with a past like that. Leave her past alone, James shouted. I repeat, we are all sinners, you included. What matters is what we are today. Your wife's ex-wife is a good person now too. Or do you think he's the one pointing his finger at Jenna, can replace her as a mother? That it's a worthy option. Actually, I hear everything. Tried to resent Jenna squeamishly swiping the remnants of porridge from the bright manicure. But the man did not even pay attention to her, continuing to argue. I still haven't heard. Where's Kathy? What did you do to her? You mean you just took your son and left her in another town like nothing happened? Yeah, I wouldn't believe that for the life of me. You beat her up again. How many times have I told you to mind your own business? Well, don't worry. Soon your little picture will come crawling back to me begging for forgiveness. And I didn't even have to hit her to do it. Now get out of my house and don't make me call the police. And without the police, I'll be kicked out. James, clenching his fists, slowly approached his brother. Nick watched him warily and immediately slipped his hand into his pocket, frantically fumbling for his cell phone. Come on, relax, the guy grinned. I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I'm leaving. But I warn you, if Kathy doesn't show up soon, I'll be back. And that's when you'll be in trouble. But Kathy showed up that afternoon, close to evening, disengaged, with black circles under her eyes. The girl walked slowly toward the more familiar gate. After standing for a moment, she pressed the bell button with a shaky hand. James watched all of this, not far away in the work car that his boss allowed him to keep. He was sure that when she returned to town, the first thing she would do would be to see where her son was. And the guy wasn't wrong. But when he saw Nick open the gate, he pushed his wife away. His hands clenched into fists of their own accord. Kathy staggered, but managed to stay on her feet. What exactly Nick had yelled in her face, James hadn't heard. Yeah, it didn't matter. So the whole situation was clear. Then he defiantly slammed the gate in her face, and the girl remained standing outside the gate with her hands over her face. Her whole body shook with sobs. James started the car and cautiously approached Kathy. Get in, he said, opening the passenger door. He won't let you in the house anyway. There's no point in standing here. Get in, I said. The girl obediently sat down in the cabin, and again emotions took over, jabbing at his shoulder. She burst into tears again. How did he manage to find us? I was sure I had carefully concealed everything. The look in her eyes, full of despair and longing, made James's heart ache. He beat you. No, not really, but it doesn't matter now. I've seen the paperwork, James. He should have Kevin now. I no longer have rights to my son. I can only see him on weekends and only in front of Nick. How am I supposed to live? I don't know what to do. Don't worry. We'll find a way out, mumbled James. Right now, you need to calm down and come to your senses. I'll take you to a very nice man, Stephen. I live in his house, and I think there's room for you there. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the huge house, Nick opened the blinds a little. He watched the couple in the car with hatred. He saw that James was driving, who was currently hugging his wife, albeit his ex-wife. Nick wasn't going to break up with her for a second. Right now, he needed her to feel her petty nature. He would make her grovel for a long time before he would allow her to be reunited with her son. He must teach that ungrateful wench a lesson. Nick's fists even itched with anticipation. The car started abruptly and was soon out of sight. I wondered where my brother was taking my wife. But no, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. Nick had planned to keep his wife under the gate all night. That's when Jenna quietly entered the room. What's next? She said loudly. Your wife showed up. How are we going to live? I really want to believe that you don't have the sense to welcome her with open arms. And I'm the mistress of this house now. I don't want to see your painting here. Your child is in my care, so don't even think about letting her in here. Are you trying to dictate terms to me? Nick, if memory serves, the day you showed up uninvited, if anything, with your stuff, I warned you you were here on loan. And if you tell me what to do, you're out of here in a heartbeat. Oh, really? Bright eyes. Jenna, calm down and don't yell at me. I already told my parents we're living together now, and I'm not gonna embarrass myself in front of them. Married and divorced. You can forget about her. If you let her in here again, I'll give her a beating so bad she'll forget she ever came here. Don't you dare, yelled Nick. She has to come here and humiliate herself. That's part of my plan, and it's the part that gives me the most pleasure. No one was going to let her in the house now. And by the way, she can see her son, but only in my presence. In the morning, James woke up to an incomprehensible noise coming from downstairs. It seemed that there were guests at home early in the morning. But who could it be? He jumped up and started to get dressed, but he didn't have time to go out. Stephen came into the room, looking alarmed, to say the least. James, there are policemen downstairs looking for the basket. For what purpose? And why would they be looking for it in the next room? And why don't the police understand anything? Stephen shifted from foot to foot, and it was obvious from his face that he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. You're probably better than that, James. The news isn't good. Nick. Anyway, his body was discovered late last night. They say he was murdered, and well, they suspect a picture of the deed. Like murdered. It can't be. But there was no time for James to get an answer. 2 policemen entered the room. They quickly looked around the room, and one of them pronounced, "When was the last time you saw?" James still sat down on the bed because his legs refused to hold him. And without answering the question of the police, he asked them a counter question. What about Nick? You don't know. Someone stabbed him with a sharp object last night. The stabbing went straight through the heart, and we suspect your sister-in-law. Yes, James, have you been slow to make sense of what the cops said? Not anymore. Whatever it was, his brother was the only person he had in this world, and James would never wish him dead under any circumstances, not even after learning that he was indirectly responsible for his father's death. The policeman kept asking questions, but James heard them as if through absorbent cotton. Kathy looked at the policeman in surprise. Why her? What makes you think Kathy is guilty? I know she had nothing to do with it. We came here together. She said she was tired and went to bed early last night. And have you seen her since? The policeman asked. We were just in her room. The bed was taken. Apparently, the girl never slept there. But that's no reason to suspect her of murder. So she couldn't sleep. So what? By the way, the brother wasn't living alone lately. His roommate, Jenna. Have you interviewed her? What did she say? Jenna. At her mom's house since yesterday afternoon. Her mom wasn't feeling well, so she went there. She spent the night at her parents' place too. But that's still no reason to suspect Kathy. Why her? James wouldn't let it go. Then I'm more likely to be the killer. First of all, my brother and I were fighting over the inheritance, and secondly, I was already in jail. You're right, agreed the policeman, and we'd certainly consider you for the role of murderer. Don't worry, but only if it weren't for one thing. Nick's neighbor, an elderly woman who suffers from insomnia, saw Kathy running out of the house in the morning with a baby in his arms. The second policeman, who until that moment had been silently shifting from foot to foot, suddenly uttered, addressing his partner, "Listen, enough. It's already clear that the girl is not here. We need to declare an interception plan before she skips town." The cops left, and James remained sitting on the bed, staring at one point. Stephen sat down beside him and handed him a mug of hot tea. "Have a drink, James. Have a drink. Come to your senses. I know it's hard to realize that Nick is gone, but life goes on." James clutched the cup of tea tightly in his hands, ignoring the fact that it was very hot. "I can't accept it. Stephen, first Dad, now Nick. Really, I didn't recognize my brother the last few days. He changed a lot during my absence. I never could get through to him. Maybe I should have just sat down and had a heart-to-heart talk. Maybe then he'd be back to his old self. James, has Nick always been like this? And did your father see it? I'm not condoning the picture, but it's his own fault for bringing it to this state." The girl was desperate and didn't realize what she was doing. He just gave her no choice. "Do you believe the picture killed him too?" James looked at his companion in surprise. "James, did you hear the cops? They said that the neighbor saw Kathy running with Kevin in her arms. Because she went to bed in the evening doesn't explain anything. It's not like we can say she was there till morning. She could have left the house quietly at any time. Where do you think she'd go? Yeah, to her son's, of course. And then it all worked out so well. And she wasn't home either. They probably started fighting again. Maybe your brother even hit her. She couldn't take it anymore. Grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on. The police still haven't figured out what was used to stab her. The murder weapon wasn't found at the scene. I think it's more than obvious, James. I understand that you like Kathy. I like her too. She's a very nice girl. But you see, anyone, even the kindest, most positive person, can be driven insane. Especially if the bargaining chip is your kid. Kathy will probably go on the run again. And you need to organize your brother's funeral. There's no one else to do it. A funeral. I don't understand, James asked. He still couldn't come to his senses. He wished that everything that had happened had been a dream, just a nightmare. He woke up and it would all be over. But there was no waking up. His brother was gone. Kathy was gone again. Did he love her? Yes, now he could admit it to himself. He was willing to go through all the hardships with her and fight for Kevin. James had always imagined how great it would be for the three of them, him, Kathy, and Kevin. But now it was all empty. He stood up, setting the cup of tea on the nightstand that was already there. The boy never touched it, then slowly turned to Stephen. "You're right. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. I just don't agree with you about the painting. Well, she couldn't have taken her brother's life. I really want her and Kevin not to get caught. At least not until they figure out who the real killer is. You and I know how my brother did business, so she wasn't the only one who might have wanted him dead." But a few hours later, word got out that Kathy and the baby had been found. caught at the train station as she was about to board the train. Seeing a police squad heading in her direction, she threw her arms around her son, and thus confirming her guilt in the eyes of the police. Nick's funeral was crowded. Many people in town knew him, but it wasn't just acquaintances who came. It wasn't a big town, and people liked to gossip. And this was a big deal. A big store owner was murdered in his own house. And who did it? His wife. His own wife. Really, it's all the talk of the town. Jenna sobbed the loudest, with a beautifully tied black silk scarf on her head. And when the coffin began to be lowered into the grave, she went up to James and squeezed his wrist to the point of pain and whispered. But even looking at it, the picture, thank God, she was captured. Let them lock her up for a long time. People like that shouldn't be out of jail at all. She ruined our whole lives with that knee. And we were going to get married. He even asked me to marry him the other day. So now I'm practically his lawfully wedded wife. So what's the bottom line? The Hares, if I'm not mistaken, are you and his son. As the conversation progressed, Jenna's tone changed at the end. People who saw Nick off to his last journey began to involuntarily listen, wanting to catch the essence of the conversation of the relatives of the deceased. Those who were particularly curious even tried to get closer. But James pulled her back. Let's leave the inheritance talk for later. I haven't thought about it yet. No, of course you haven't. He grinned evilly at Jenna, straight up innocent sheep. Dab and her brother hated each other. Kathy was a murderer. So the only one who was close to Nick and really loved him. That's me. And I'm gonna be out of business because we didn't get the damn stamps at the registry office. Jenna's tears dried immediately, and there was only a greedy light in her eyes. James couldn't help but wonder. He hadn't known her until now, but it took him a few minutes to realize that she and Nick were worthy of each other. Her brother certainly wouldn't dare raise his hand at her. That would probably backfire too. James took a close look at her face, though. Despite the fact that it was strong, up close, it was obvious that the plump lower lips was not a gift of nature, but the result of a blow. Consequently, things between her and Nick were not all that smooth as she was trying to present here. It had been rough too. Even later, in the dining room, acquaintances began to approach James with expressions of condolence. James nodded. Look, what a wonderful man his brother had been. But it was flattering. Lying only made him feel disgusted. All he saw in his eyes sad them only curiosity. They were genuinely interested in who would get all the stores now. So they came up to shake James' hand. Although a few days ago, many of them, having met James on the street, would not even say hello to the former criminal. At some point, the guy felt like he might explode. He wanted so badly to yell, enough. Nick was not a saintly, kind-hearted man. What are you all saying? And you know it. And Kathy is not a brutal murderer who's in jail. Stephen had an eagle eye on James, sensed his mood. The man was there instantly. He put a hand on the guy's shoulder and said, well, I guess it's time to sit down at the tables. Let's remember Nick. And after dinner, James went over to Stephen's. Would you mind if I stayed with you for a while? He asked the man. I can't stay in a house where first my father died, and then my brother was gone. Yes, of course, Stephen smiled. Of course, you can stay here permanently, but you'll still have to deal with the house. If you can't live there, you can sell it. Stephen, I'm in no condition to talk about this right now. I'm thinking about the painting. Do you think they'll let me talk to her? I'd like to ask her myself how it all came about. Well, why not? The man shrugged. Dating. It's not illegal. We could try to get a meeting. We just need to find a lawyer. James managed to get a date with Kathy after a few days. And there he was, sitting across from this pale girl. And the first thing he heard from her was, James, I didn't do it. I didn't kill Nick. He exhaled. He believed her right away. Well, Kathy couldn't lie like that. Looking him in the eye, she wasn't like that. Then how did all this happen? Kathy, you went to your room last night, and ended up at my brother's. Why did you even go to his place at night? Not at night. It was morning, but very early. I couldn't sleep. So I decided to go to Nick's to wait for him to leave for work. I wanted to beg him to let me see Kevin for at least 10 minutes. The buses weren't running yet, so I walked. And when I got to the house, I saw the gate was open. So I went in. And there, well, I ran into Nick. He was lying on the first floor with his arms spread out. There was no one else in the house. What do you think I should have done? I was confused at first, but then I ran into the nursery, grabbed Kevin out of his crib, and ran. At first, I just wanted to go back to the Stephen house. Yeah, I did. I realize now that I should have called the police right there in the house. But I'm telling you, I was scared out of my mind. I realized later, when I was running away with Kevin, that I could be blamed for everything. So I ran to the train station. So what are you saying? James got agitated. The murder was committed in the evening, and you came to the house in the morning. Did you tell the coroner about this? What's the reason you're still here? Why aren't they letting you go? James, are you really that naive, or are you just pretending to be? Who's gonna believe me now? There's too much against me. Besides, Nick and I were divorced, and I already tried to run away from him with my son. There are plenty of witnesses who can confirm our scandals outside the house. Everyone knows I wanted to take the baby for myself. I don't think my innocence can be proven anymore. Is that wrong? James exclaimed. Don't worry. I'll find a good lawyer and get you out of here. Kalina stared intently into James's eyes. Do you trust me? I don't care about anyone around me, but it's important that you believe me. I do, and I'll do my best to help. Thank you, James. You don't have to thank me. I was in the same position myself once, but unlike you, I did take a man's life, and you never once condemned me for it. Do you remember? James tilted his head, thought for a moment, and then suddenly said, But on the other hand, Karen, even if you had really killed Nick, I'd still be on your side. I saw with my own eyes how he treated you, and I realized that you could have just been defending yourself. No one can understand you better than me. James interrupted Kathy's boyfriend. Our time is coming to an end. I'm being led now, and I won't have time to ask you for the most important thing. If the situation is not resolved in my favor, and I am still accused of this murder, I will not let my nephew grow up in an orphanage. Who better than me to know how bad it is out there? It's even worse if they take custody of him, just because he's the heir. Take my son with you. I can trust you because I know you love him, and he'll be fine with you. It's too soon to talk about that. I believe we can prove our innocence. You're not going to jail. Remember what time you left the house. And the way you walked home. Nick, there's no way anyone but your neighbors saw you. I'll take the same streets and ask all the tenants to prove enough that you went there in the morning and not in the evening when your brother was killed. Stephen looked at James with sympathy. James, look, you've been all over the place. You don't even have time to eat. How many times? Don't you realize you won't find any witnesses? And if you do, they won't be in Kathy's favor. But the kid just kept shaking his head. There must be someone who saw her that morning. She didn't go in the morning. She left in the evening. You can't see that she's lying, and I can understand it. That girl can't confess to you that she killed your brother. She doesn't want to do time. But the picture's coming together nicely. Kalina came to see her son. Nick raised his hand to her again. So she poked her ex-husband with whatever she could get her hands on. No, it wasn't anything. We already know it was sewing scissors. Again, where those scissors were kept, no stranger could have known. They were only used by Kathy before the divorce. That's another fat point against her. No, James moved his eyebrows stubbornly. Regardless, he continued to run the streets. He'd already avoided the entire route Kathy had taken to get to her ex-husband's house that morning, if her words were to be believed. James knocked on houses, questioned people in examining the recorders installed on cars parked that morning that the girl might have gotten into. But it was all in vain. Every night, Stephen argued that Kathy was lying, and that she was guilty. And James slowly began to doubt her innocence. Then one day he met a young boy who lived not far from Nick's house. When he saw the picture of the painting, he looked at it for a long time and then said, "I think I saw it, but not in the morning. She came in the evening. We were just with the guys going for a ride, and I went out of the house. And I think this girl was heading that way." The kid waved his hand in the direction of Nick's house. "But she looked a lot like her, although I'm not 100% sure." And that's when a seed of doubt, of apprehension began to sprout in the boy's heart. Was Kathy lying to him? Maybe Stephen is right, and it's hard for her to admit to James that she killed his brother. But he told her he'd be on her side anyway. He wouldn't convict. James found a good lawyer who quoted a price that made the guy's eyes pop. All the savings that the guy managed to save during his working life. He did not have enough and had to borrow in Stephen. After all, the inheritance. James still hadn't come into his inheritance. The lawyer tried his best. On the eve of the trial, James met with him. "You know, James, I'll be honest with you. I regret taking this case because it's a failure. There's not a single defense witness. I mean, you've tried so hard, but you haven't found one. Most likely Kathy is guilty, and the court will easily prove it. There's too much against the girl." "What if there is a witness?" James exclaimed. "What if that witness is me saying I spent the whole night with Kathy? I wouldn't advise it." The lawyer gave James a piercing look. "I wouldn't advise you to do that. It's too late to make a statement like that. No one will believe you now. I wish they had. And now Kathy's almost proven guilty, which means you'll be perjuring yourself on the stand. And given your past, I don't think you want to do that. You were punished for what you did and didn't believe, despite your dead father's money. And in Kathy's case, there were more circumstances from the hauler. She won from the orphanage. So there was intent. The prosecutor would push for it and ask for the maximum sentence for the girl." James had goosebumps running up and down his spine. "Maximum? How much?" "Well, under this article, it's 16 years. Well, I don't think she'll get the maximum." James' lawyer hastened to reassure James, seeing the terror in his eyes. "And I'll try to get it reduced." At the trial, Kathy cried the whole time. The prosecutor shouted, making the girl look like a calculated murderer of a respected citizen of the city. Unexpectedly for James, Jen appeared as a witness for the prosecution. She diligently recounted how Kathy wiped out near her and Nick's house every night, how she had stolen the baby once before and run away with it to another town, and how Nick had tried his best to keep her out of the house because he was afraid she might hurt them all. After all, she had a very hot temper. This is where James' patience broke, and he shouted from his seat that it was a lie. Kathy, on the other hand, is a calm and balanced person, and the violent character was possessed by the murdered man himself, who repeatedly raised his hand against his wife. The judge reprimanded James, and then Kathy's past came up. No matter how hard he tried, Kathy's lawyer gave him 10 years. Upon hearing the sentence, the girl burst into tears. As she was led away from the courtroom under escort, she kept turning her head to look for James, and when she found him, she screamed, "James, take Kevin. I beg you, and take Kevin for yourself." The guy was almost crying as he left the courtroom. "You weren't much help, were you?" he said reproachfully to the lawyer. "Believe me, I did everything I could," he said. "If it wasn't for me, the girls would have given even more." "We'll appeal." Stephen, who knew James' home, was not surprised to hear about the sentence. "Honestly, I thought it'd be less." "What are you gonna do next? You're gonna leave it as it is?" "No, of course, my lawyer, and I will appeal. But we have a bigger problem right now. Kevin's been placed in an orphanage, and Kathy's been asking me to take my nephew for myself. Do you think that's possible?" Stephen was surprised. "The little one's a year and a half old. How are you gonna handle a kid that small? What do you even know about babies? That's one thing. And secondly, what makes you think they'll give it to you? What's the problem? I'm a relative. Yeah, a relative with a very interesting background and no marriage. I'd be happy to be wrong. But first of all, why don't you go to the child welfare office and see how much chance you have in this case? I'm sure there will be plenty of people wanting custody of Kevin. And you know the reason as well as I do. James rushed straight to the child welfare office. Once again, Stephen was right. There was very little chance that Kevin would be given to James, and the primary reason for the refusal was his criminal record. If the guy had at least been married, that would be a whole different conversation. So what's the problem? Well, get married, Stephen smiled, and then he faltered when he saw the gleam in James's eyes. If anything, I was kidding. Or do you have a fiancé in mind? Why would I have a fiancé? I mean, you could have a sham marriage. Find a normal, adequate girl. You explain everything. You sign the papers. I'll take Kevin. We'll be married for a year, and then we'll get a divorce. The nephew will stay with me anyway. James shook her head. Stephen, you've completely lost your head not to go crazy. Why do you have to go to all this trouble? Of course, nothing good in the fact that the nephew is brought up in an orphanage with living relatives. But maybe you should wait a little longer to adopt. Maybe you'll meet some worthy ones along the way. And marry for love. I don't have time, Stephen. And besides, I've already met someone worthy. I know exactly who I want to marry for love, but due to certain circumstances, we can't be together yet. But she asks me to take her son. And without her requests, I would never have let my nephew go to a state home. The next day, James walked briskly into the cafe and saw Lucy sitting at the table. He'd called an hour ago and arranged to meet her here. James, you're late. Pretending to be, angrily, muttered the girl. Kind of unemployed right now. You can't make it to a meeting on time. I'm sorry for running around for everything. But I see you didn't waste any time either. Decided to have a big lunch, nodded James on a large portion of pilaf, standing in front of the friend. Of course I did. Why should I starve while you're waiting for me to get here? All right, spit it out. What happened? From what I hear, all your hard work went to waste. Kathy got locked up. Yeah, that's right. There's not much to tell. You tell me. Did you find a driver to take my place? I found another driver, but no friend, smiled the girl. It's all right. You and I didn't become friends right away. Not the right case. In your place is now a distinct pensioner. With him, even I cannot be friends. A purely business relationship, laughed Lucy. She was generally a cheerful, easygoing girl. James could relax with her. This girl could find a reason to laugh in any situation, even the most difficult. After his brother's funeral, James had to quit because all his time was spent trying to prove Kathy's innocence. In addition, Stephen insisted that James return to the store as a supervisor, so that Kevin wouldn't end up with an unprofitable business in the future. Yeah, after all, the stores were his father's baby. And no matter what the circumstances, business had to continue. Lucy, look, James said, you and I have discussed many topics, but you've never said anything about your personal life. You have a boyfriend, but a favorite fiancé. I don't know how to put it right. Lucy almost choked on a sip of coffee, which she decided to wash down her dense lunch, returning the cup with the drink on the table. She looked at James with wide-open eyes. Why the questions? Not out of curiosity. You're right. I was going to ask you for your help to propose a sham marriage to me, so that Kevin would be given to me. I'm in, and that's what Lucy said. You can't ask about anything right away. You can't even think about it. I've already thought about everything. The girl smiled. The other day we talked to Stephen. He told me everything. I guessed the reason for our meeting, but I decided to play the surprise until the last. I'm very good at it. It's true that each of you sees the situation differently. Stephen wants you to have the baby, but only so you can run the stores. But I'm sure you just love your nephew and some other people. That's true, isn't it? Once again, James nodded. Jenna is also a candidate for the role of guardian. The girl who's been living with Nick lately. There's no way that's going to happen. She doesn't want the boy. She's after the inheritance. So I can count on you, Lucy. Yes, of course. Why not? I'm free as a bird at the moment. And what's not to help a friend? I rarely say this, but you're a good man. Prison hasn't spoiled you. People like you are very rare. The boy should definitely be with you. Wait together for your Kathy, and you'll be happy. We could get married tomorrow. Except maybe we should make it look like we're living together. And you and I should have a house. Do you have a plan? And I did have a plan. After my brother's death, one very interesting detail came to light. It turned out that the will signed by his father only covered the business, and it didn't say a word about the house. Nick simply lied to his brother about the real estate in the hope that he would not specify, so he did. And now that everything was out in the open, James could easily be the sole owner of the house. That's where he planned to live with Kevin, at least for the first time, to sign the day after Lucy was ready. The couple didn't make it. Well, they didn't have to wait a month at the registry office. Stephen all arranged the necessary acquaintances, and a small gratitude in cash equivalent played a role. And in a week, James and Lucy officially became husband and wife. Lucy turned out to be a good actress. In front of the guardianship authorities, she was a nice homegirl. Tattoos covered with sleeves, and even wore a dress almost for the first time in her life. Custody had to be fought for. In addition to Jenna was drawn and distant relatives, the existence of which James did not even suspect. The guy had to go through 33 instances, knocking on all the doors. But at least then justice prevailed. As Stephen put it, Kevin was given to his own uncle, though he joined once, but now he is an exemplary family man with a big house. James would never forget the day he came to the infant home to pick up his nephew. How fast was Kevin running toward him? With his little legs, the boy had lost a lot of weight. And when James hugged him, the little boy closed his skinny arms around his neck. At that moment, James had tears in his eyes. Lucy, on the other hand, immediately made her stand. She helped James. She had married him legally, but quit her job and devote all her time to taking care of the child. When they moved into James' parents' house, fictitious spouse took a spacious room on the second floor, and James and Kevin were placed on the first floor. Kevin did not leave James without attention for a minute. Everywhere crowds follow him like a tail. The boy suffered stress after his stay at the orphanage. It took about a month before Kevin began to resemble his old self, a cheerful, active boy. That's when Stephen was more active on James. James, I understand, of course. A child demands maximum attention, but you can't leave your father's business. The stores are running at a loss. I told you, I'm not a manager and I can't manage. That's even more fun, you know. Business has been bad. And now we need a firm hand. What are you waiting for? For Dad's business to go bankrupt. You've officially become the heir's guardian, taking over and putting things in order. How am I supposed to leave this? There are two options. Either we put the boy in a nursery or we hire a nanny. No, the nursery's not right for us. Kevin's not out of the nursery yet, but not Anya. James, all I'm asking is that you don't drag it out. There's nowhere else to go. If you want, I can help you. I know a woman of pre-retirement age. Of course, she has no special education, but she has a wonderful experience with children, and most importantly, kind and responsible. For this I vouch. Do you want me to talk to her? James hesitated to leave Kevin with a strange woman the guy did not want. But on the other hand, Stephen, it's time things in the stores were going badly, and James knew why and how to fix it. All right, Stephen, you got yours? Talk to your friend. Have her come over. I'll take a look at her. Lucy and Kevin, sitting right on the living room floor, on a huge fluffy rug, were assembling a large castle from a constructor. The boy was engrossed and panting with pleasure, building tall towers. Lucy, though she didn't mind. Sometimes Kevin ate with hidden irritation. Every now and then he glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. She had a date in an hour, and James still hadn't returned from his store. Well, finally, the girl exclaimed when she saw her fictitious husband entering the living room. "I've been waiting for you for ages. I have to run away." "Why are you sitting with Kevin?" "Where is Maria?" asked James. Picks up in his arms, sweat running to him. "Child." "James, did you even look at the clock?" "Let Maria go. I mean, she needs to be home sometimes." "But you know, I didn't expect you to hold on so tight, did I?" "Sorry, a lot of paperwork piled up, even though I've only been away for 3 days. And by the way, you never told me about your trip. How's Kathy holding up?" "Yeah, I wouldn't say she's holding up. She's lost a lot of weight. You can tell she's got nothing but her eyes. It's bad. Pictures of her in prison, real bad. The only joy in her life, as she told me herself, was my arrival and the new pictures of Kevin. She couldn't tear herself away from them. Kathy says that Kevin looks happy in the pictures, and that makes her happy. But still, looking at her, I don't think she'll last long there. We have to do something. We have to do something." "But what?" "What can you do, James? You've done everything you can. There's nothing you can do. Besides, let's say you're sure Kathy didn't kill your brother. Stephen and I have our own version. What's more delicate than that? On the contrary, I'm sure Kathy's in jail for the case." "What do you mean?" "It wasn't her fault, of course. Her husband must have beaten her. I think there should be an article. A different one. In a state of effect, for example. But for that, she had to confess. She's the one who pushed your brother out of desperation. And I'm sure, but Kathy says she did. I don't know what Kathy says." "That's it, James. I really don't have time for this. It's already been said 1,000 times. Okay, Kevin's had dinner." I left. Lucy didn't get home until the morning. It was a day off, and it was safe to go to bed. But there was no sleep in the girl's eyes. She sat patiently in the kitchen and waited for James to come out for breakfast. "You've been home a long time. Why are you sitting there?" asked James when the girl waited for him. "Here you are, waiting while you are sick. I heard the door slammed." Maria came in. "Yeah, she's in the nursery dressing Kevin." "What did you want to talk about?" "Listen, James, here's the thing. Anyway, last night, my confidence was a little low. I already told you about the guy from the beleaguered salon I'm dating. We spent the whole night together tonight. Look, let's skip the details," James grumbled. "I love you, of course, but not enough to listen to all that." Okay. No one was going to give you the details. We spent the whole night with him. And naturally, we had a chance to talk about a lot of different things. And I learned something. Turns out Jenna's mom is getting massages from Anthony. And she's a very chatty woman, I must say. And what she likes to talk about most is her daughter, touting her virtues. I mean, she's got to get her to someone. How perky Jenna is, how confident she is, how she can stand up for herself. No man would ever raise a hand to Jenna. No consequences. And the one who did, still in the picture as if alive. Anthony certainly doesn't listen much to the chatter of his clients. But at this point, Jenna's mom had stopped talking as if she'd said too much. And Anthony was alarmed by this moment. There's something else. Remembered Jenna's alibi. Allegedly, on the day Nick died, her mother was sick, and she had to go to her house before lunch. Well, in fact, that very afternoon, Jenna's mom was at Anthony's for a massage, and she was feeling fine. Wait, get excited, James. This was definitely the day. Your Anthony can't be wrong. He could be if he didn't keep records of all his massages and his clients. He always has a notebook of those notes in his car, and he and I double-checked it. It's absolutely accurate. So what's the story? James was almost screaming with excitement. Jenna was lying. So her mom wasn't sick, and she probably didn't leave the house that day. She could have killed Nick. Parents are parents to confirm their children's alibis. That's it. That's what I was thinking, Lucy said grimly. But don't get too excited. It doesn't prove anything. And the police won't even talk to you about it. Lucy, you know, Jenna calls me a lot. At first, she wanted to meet Kevin, but she said she missed him, wanted to come here to the house. And when I suggested we meet on the playground during a walk, she immediately refused. And now she says that she has some things left in this house and she needs to get them urgently. So I offered to give them to her myself. But again, Jenna refused. She says she doesn't remember where things are and wants to look for them herself. In general, there is a burning desire to get into our house. I didn't think it was strange at first. But now, with the recent news, I'm curious. Lucy was very curious. That's what Jenna's up to. Maybe there's something here that confirms she didn't leave the house that day. And Jenna wants to destroy it. Or the murder weapon. It hit James. Now let's say Jenna stabbed Nick with the scissors and they weren't found near the body. What did she do with them? Took them with her. And if she didn't, what if she hid them somewhere in the house and now she wants to take them out? But she's been very insistent on coming to our house, and that's a variant of you sometimes think. Lucy said with a respectful glance at her friend. And what should we do with you in this case? I know we should install cameras all over the house and invite Jenna. But that would be very expensive. Lucy exclaimed. Imagine, cameras in every room would cost you so much money. If there's any chance of proving Kathy's innocence, I don't care about any money. Stephen was angry. You bet, James was on fire with delusions again. When will he finally realize that Kathy is in jail for the case? She did it herself. And it's useless to prove her innocence. Business at the store only got a little better. And James took some of the proceeds so he could install cameras all over the place. And now he's come to him for help. Stephen, well, you have to understand, it's for a reason. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Jenna's behavior is very suspicious. At the cemetery during the funeral, I noticed her lip was split. Maybe Nick hit her too. God only knows what happened between them afterward. Let's check it out. Do you know anyone on the police force? Yeah, an old man waved his hands in the air. He sometimes comes here to the store for parts for his foreign car. Well, he and I can talk about the weather, that's all. But this is serious business. What you're doing requires a search warrant. Do you need probable cause? There isn't, James. What you're saying is bullshit. You're just grasping at straws. No one in the police force is going to take that into account. And if it's for money? With a desperate gleam in your eye, James asked. I've never paid a bribe in my life. And frankly, I don't know how. But if you give, as they say, a bribe, then I think the policeman will go along with us. Stephen shook his head tiredly. All right, James, I'll try to help you again. Let's just agree with you one last time. I mean, your fixation on Kathy's innocence. If things don't work out with Ira now, you'll settle down. Promise me that you'll settle down and laugh off Kathy's time served, and you'll wait for her like you should for 10 years. And Jenna was desperate to get into the house where she used to live with Nick. But one day James called her, and it was a surprise. I'm home tonight. You can come pick up whatever you want. And why did you suddenly get there so soon? She asked suspiciously. Well, the house, I think. To sell things we'll still have to take out. So if there's something of yours here, come and take it. What's the matter? That's a relief, Jenna. So you're selling after all. Okay, I'll come by tonight at 7 o'clock. That'll be fine. When Jenna gingerly crossed the threshold of the house, it seemed to her that it would be easy. But nevertheless, the terrible memories of Katya or the girl wave, it was strange. Jenna did not consider herself an impressionable person. James met the girl on the first floor. Hi, want some tea? Kevin and I are having dinner. I wouldn't say no. The girl was glad that James was already busy in the kitchen. Perfect. There was just one more thing Jenna was worried about. Is your wife home? She asked. Glanced around the stairs to the second floor. No, Lucy's not home. Kevin, say hello. Do you remember Aunt Jenna? The boy looked indifferently at his unfamiliar aunt. He certainly didn't remember her. In the kitchen, James put the vegetable stew on the plates and realized, and we might as well have dinner with us. "Oh, no. I'll just have tea." The girl waited for James and Kevin to start eating, making sure they wouldn't be getting up from the table anytime soon. Sipped the tea and grumbled, "Oh, it's so hot. Let it cool down a bit. I'll be going now." "I'll get what I was going to get. I'm going up to the second floor. Do you mind?" "Let me, of course," without blinking an eye, the guy answered. Jenna went out and closed the door behind her. Lucy, who was actually in the house, was sitting, and at this very moment in the room under the stairs of the very room that Nick had once allocated for James, and through a slit in the open door. Lucy watched her guest and was a little startled when Jenna, instead of going to the second floor, rushed under the stairs. It seemed to Lucy that Jenna was about to burst into that room. But the one stopped early. She shook her hand deep into the stairwells and pulled out from there an object gleamed chief her hands from the color of the chandelier. Jenna slipped the find into her small purse with lightning speed and then headed for the second floor. Lucy, holding the phone in her hands, called out, "Come in. Come in right now. She needs to be searched right away." She put something in her bag. Jenna went downstairs without a care in the world. With a sense of accomplishment, she'd done what she'd come here to do. She didn't need any more of these ridiculous conversations with James, and she didn't really want to have tea with them. The only thing she wanted to do was to get out of this house quickly and get rid of the fire that lived in the purse clutched tightly to her body. Jenna shuddered as she walked down to the first floor and ran into a crowd of people. There stood James, Lucy, Stephen, and worst of all, two men in police uniforms. One of the policemen held out his hand to Jenna. "Let me see your bag." "On what grounds?" screamed Jenna, clutching her hands tightly to the accessory. "And on that basis," answered for the policeman. Smirking snidely, "Lucy, that I saw with my own eyes how you pulled something from the stairwells. Something very interesting. I was sitting in this room, and I saw everything." Lucy pointed her hand under the stairs. "She's lying. She had nothing to see." "I could be lying, of course," Lucy continued. "There's no camera." "What cameras?" Jenna's eyes ran frightenedly. The girl frantically looked around the walls to her horror. Only now she came across a faintly visible red light. Yes, you're not wrong. That's exactly the camera. And it's got the right angle. It's covering the area under the stairs. What the hell is going on here?" Yelling Jenna. "Let me out of the house. I don't know what you want from me. You're crazy. I'm not gonna let you look in my bag. You have no right. You need a warrant for that. Or what do you call it?" "He's laughing," the policeman said calmly. "Here you are, please." He shoved a paper under Irina's nose. "Now I'm going to have to examine your purse." Jenna struggled like a tiger, clutching at the leather strap. But the forces were unequal, and the bag ended up in the hands of the policeman. One of them opened it, looked at the others, and then with a napkin carefully extracted an object lying right on top of it. That object turned out to be sewing scissors, picks, stains on the point. "There, I told you so." "You," exulted James, almost throwing herself hard with joy. "Surprised at you." "Wow," hummed the man. "Yes, James, you were right this time. I never would have guessed." "Oh, Jenna, what was it like for you to watch an innocent woman, Kathy, go to jail?" "Innocent? Why would she be innocent?" "I don't know what you're talking about. What is this?" "It's not mine at all. I don't know how those scissors ended up in my bag. You planted them on me. Let me out, and I'll go home." Jenna got in trouble, trying to shove the people in front of her. But the cops took her firmly under the elbow. "Are you under arrest?" one of them announced briefly. "What do you want here?" with anger asked Jenna, who had come to see her in the detention center. James. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you." "Why did you do it? Why did you kill my brother?" "Oh, what hypocrisy. You hated your brother as much as he hated you. And she didn't kill anyone." First there was Jenna, and then she looked back at the escort who had brought her in. The uniformed man was standing far enough away that he couldn't hear their conversation. Jenna's face twisted with rage and she was carried away. "You know I'm going to tell you, though. You're already figuring it out. What's the big deal? Why did I kill your brother, you ask? Because he was an asshole. He took advantage of me for the smallest of favors. I never got any real expensive gifts from him. I moved into his house. I was gonna live with him, get married, adjust, live, cook him dinners, lunches, breakfasts. That doesn't sound like me at all. I turned into a housewife. But you know, I wanted to marry him. I really did. And why did he keep looking for his stupid Kathy? And when he did, he brought a baby home and made me babysit it. And even after that coup de grace, I was ready to move on with him. To look after a boy I didn't need at all. Your brother just waited until he decided to bring his ex-wife back into the house. And he told me to get out of the house. Can you imagine getting out of the house like a used rag? He just wiped my feet. And when I started to make reasonable complaints to him in raised tones, he hit me with all his might in the face, smashed my lip. That's when I went into a rage. Nobody treats me like that. And I wasn't going to kill him anyway. No, I wasn't. I knew where those scissors were. I opened the drawer. I jammed them in with my hand. I wanted to poke him in the shoulder, but your brother's a coward. He tried to dodge, and it hit him in the chest. Nick collapsed like a Leatherman. That's where I sang. I panicked bad. I should have gotten those scissors out of the house right away. And I panicked like a fool and put them under the stairs before I had a chance to think about it. So your parents knew and deliberately covered for you. My mom knew, so what? That's why she's my mom. She's proud of me too, and she thinks I should never get hurt. Yeah, she is. What did you want? Except, you know, you're the only one who heard everything I said in here. I really wanted to get it out. I'm tired of keeping it all inside. But no one else will hear it from me. I'll deny my guilt to the end. No one can prove anything with a pair of fucking scissors. Not a bloody pair of scissors, but the murder weapon. James answered calmly. Today it became known that fingerprints were found on them. Yes, that can't be true, Jenna exclaimed. I erased them. Well then, James smirked. A couple of prints were found. Next time you kill someone, be careful. The case has been remanded, and Kathy will be released soon. Kathy, are you and your brother obsessing over that blessed girl? It's all her fault. Letting her husband use her as a punching bag. All Nick had to do was fight back in the beginning, like I did. If only that coward hadn't tried to dodge, he'd have gotten off with a blank shoulder. And Kathy deserves to go to jail. I'll have the best lawyer in the world, and they won't prove I'm guilty. So they won't let your basket go. Don't be happy. But Kathy was released. The girl sobbed when she saw her son. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she would have to serve a full term and could not believe what was happening. It seemed to Kalina that this was just a dream, and it was about to end, and she would have to return to the horrible prison routine. Lucy and James watched with a smile on their faces as Kathy pulled Kevin against her and squeezed him so tightly that it hurt a little at times. Despite this, Kevin never once ventured out, never complained, but only pressed himself against his mother, clutching his hands into her thick hair. As the girl gave birth to her arms and let her son go to the floor, she poisoned herself, examined herself. I need to wash up. I need a shower right away. Why do you ask? Stupid laughed. Sure, go ahead, be afraid. I'll get you a towel and a clean robe. After Kathy left to wash herself off the smell of prison, Lucy glanced cheerfully at James. Well, hubby, our marriage is coming to an end. Who's going to file first, you or me? Whatever, James shrugged. You want to go together. I hope you're not mad at me. You've been helping me so much. You're my closest friend, Lucy. You don't have to leave this house if you want. Stay as long as you want. You know, I think I'm gonna take you up on your offer. When I found out Kathy was cleared of all charges, I made a decision I've been making for a long time. I'm gonna be here for another week. And in that time, I'll get my affairs in order, and then I'll leave. Where are you going? James exclaimed. What are we gonna do without you? Well, you'll manage somehow. Lucy said, I'm going to the metropolis. I'll make up my mind this week. Maybe I'll find my destiny in a big city. I hope so, said James and stepped forward and hugged her. Lucy, this is so great. Thank you for everything. For being you, for meeting you. If I didn't have you and Stephen right now, things would be really bad. I know that. Oh, don't give me any of that tenderness. Lucy poked James in the shoulder with her fist. Because I'm so upset, I'm going to cry. And I'm not supposed to have an image. Besides, why are you hugging me? I'm not leaving yet. You told me I'd be gone a week. We'll cuddle in a week. Kevin was long asleep and Kathy was still sitting next to his crib. She could not take her eyes off the native pilot. The girl spent almost the whole day with her son and still could not believe in what was happening. Could something good really happen to her? Behind the nursery door, the floors creaked. Kathy knew it was James, shuffling from foot to foot in there for the last hour, waiting for her to come out. They hadn't talked, and talk they should. Was Kathy ready for that conversation? Yes, she was. The girl got up from her chair, turned down the brightness, put on her headphones, and walked out to James. Kathy, you will marry me, blurted out James the lyrics to Shiny. If it's been on his tongue since morning. That's how confused Kathy was at once. I thought you were still married. You know what marriage is and what it was for, don't you? Lucy. She's Lucy. She's a wonderful person, finished Kathy. I'm very grateful to her for the boyfriend. I didn't get the chance today, but I'll be sure to tell her that. And yes, James, of course I'll marry you. That and yourself. That's you know how I feel about you. James took Kathy's hand and pulled her to him. Did the girl pull away? No, not now. I'm sorry, but I'm not ready yet. There's some kind of moral block inside. I don't know if you understand me. I understand, James sighed. I'll wait. He turned around and went to his room. Sleep wasn't working. Just behind the wall was the one he needed, the one he'd been fighting for so long. The door of the room creaked open softly, and Kathy stood on the threshold, illuminated by the moonlight from the window, wearing a light nightgown. James, what am I talking about? What am I not ready for? Yes, I've been dreaming about this almost from the moment we first met. I don't remember the moment I fell in love with you. I want to be with you now and always for the rest of my life.